Hi all, this is going to be a short video about your final term paper assignment. In this video, I'm going to go over the assignment sheet and talk about some ways you can develop your paper. And then I'm going to read through an example paper that isn't for this class. It's an example argumentative paper to talk about how you should be writing a term paper in a philosophy class, an argumentative paper. So first, let me go over the assignment sheet. So it'll be 150 points for this assignment. The length of the paper will be about 6 to 7 pages, a little shorter than I was originally planning, but circumstances. MLA format, so that's 6 to 7 full pages in MLA format. So, the usual 12-point font, and follow MLA format. If you don't know what that is, then just Google it. You can look at the Purdue OWL. It's a great site for all that kind of stuff. The due dates, consult the syllabus and the Canvas assignment. Those due dates are still correct for this assignment. Directions. So a lot of this will seem familiar from the first paper you wrote. Identify and explain a specific groundbreaking technology in industrial automation that is, 1, not widely known to the public, i.e. those lacking expertise in the relevant field, and 2, has been developed or first implemented on a large-scale basis in the last 10 years, explicating the social significance of the technology throughout your paper. And this is the new part of this paper. So all that you've already done in a previous paper. Now you have to defend whether it is a positive or negative contribution to humanity at large. So, let me talk about this right now. So in your first paper, you discussed an important technology in industrial automation that's come about in the last 10 years. In this one, you have to add on to it, talk about the social significance of the technology, and defend whether it's a positive or negative contribution to humanity at large. So the way I conceive of this is to make a good argument. You need to get the facts of the matter straight, and then to make really a value claim about it, you need to get the facts straight. Then you need to add some principles about what's valuable and why might those things be valuable. So what you'll want to add on are the considerations that we've been talking about throughout, especially the second part of this course, but even in the first part of this course. So in the second part of this course, we've covered some moral theories. So utilitarianism, if you're going to evaluate your technology in terms of what utilitarians might find worthwhile, will the technology contribute to maximizing well-being, or would not introducing the technology or modifying it contribute better towards maximizing well-being? If you're going to talk about your technology through the lens of a deontological moral theory, are there any threats to rational or autonomous beings, using them as mere means towards somebody else's ends? Is the technology not universalizable? Virtue theory would be kind of an awkward fit here, but you could possibly bring that in. But then throughout the rest of, if it's a technology that's relevant to warfare, then some considerations from the last book, especially the last chapter that we covered, would be relevant. If you're talking about social robots, then you want to factor in some of the stuff that the first book talked about regarding social robots, what their role is, how we should build a plan to best develop them so that they maximize well-being, or that we take care not to threaten people's autonomy, or that we don't violate people's rights. We're starting to talk about that now in the class. If there are concerns with, at the end of this class, we'll be talking about capitalism and how that factors into ethical problems, if you want to bring in any of that stuff and how it might add some little wrenches to the value of your product, then that could be interesting as well. So hopefully that makes some sense. Basically what you're doing is you're tacking on an evaluation of the technology that you discussed in your first paper. Now you could discuss an entirely new technology if you weren't happy with your first paper or the topic of your first paper. You could talk about a new one, but what you have to do is evaluate it, and so you'll have to reformulate your introduction to add a thesis statement in, because now you'll be constructing an argument. So you're going to use the facts from your first paper and then talk about some of the issues surrounding morality and value theory that we've talked about in the rest of the class, and construct an argument for whether the technology should be adopted, how we should move forward with it, or whether it should be rejected, full stop. You got to have at least 8 scholarly sources, books and articles combined. You can have additional sources if you want, but at least 8 scholarly sources. Type double space, clearly organized, properly punctuated. Must have a thesis and be argumentative and analytical in academic tone. Here you're constructing an argument. This is not just reporting facts like the first paper was. So let's talk a little bit about how argumentative papers are constructed and some things you might want to do with your paper. So here's an example of an argumentative paper. Talk about giving till it hurts. So you're going to want to have a title. Make it clever if you can. What should we do about the world hunger problem? Some, such as Robert Nozick, might say, since I have a right to private property, provided I've not acquired it through force or fraud, I'm entitled to my wealth and need not give anything to starving nations. Others, like Peter Singer, think that we owe it to these nations to help them out, to maximize the overall happiness in the world, as long as we do not sacrifice something of comparable moral significance. In this paper, I will explain and examine Peter Singer's argument and will attempt to show that Singer's argument is a plausible one by replying to 2 objections. So note that this paper is for an entirely different assignment, an entirely different class, but it's a nice argumentative paper. So let's talk about what you can do with your introduction for this assignment. Some things that this author does that you can steal from them. So the first thing is jump right into the issue. If you can, in 1 or 2 sentences, make it clear to the reader why, what bigger issues your technology touches on, and get right into the topic. What should we do about this developing technology X? Or here's a problem, and here's a proposed technology to solve the problem. Is this a good solution? Get right in there with your topic question or a quote, some way of roping the reader in. But don't start too far back. Don't start saying things like, since the beginning of time, people have thought X. That's ridiculous. Jump right into your topic. Don't make it too fluffy. The next thing the author does is propose some opposing views. That's a good idea for your paper. You're trying to argue for a thesis. Hopefully your thesis is somewhat controversial. Hopefully it's not something that everybody agrees with. So you could have a couple different takes on the issue and highlight people who think different things about the issue. Finally, what the author does in the introduction is this last sentence. In this paper, I will explain and examine Peter Singer's argument, and I will attempt to show that Singer's argument is a plausible one by replying to 2 objections against his view. So there's some important things that you need to do in your paper here. This is a thesis statement and a plan. You need both for your paper. You'll need to say, I am going to do X in this paper, and here is how I'm going to do X. By doing A, B, C, right? I'm going to prove X in this paper by doing A, B, and C. That should be the last sentence of your introduction where you fill in the variables for X, A, B, and C. You're showing what you're trying to prove and the steps involved in proving it. You need that. I can't stress that enough. If you don't have a thesis statement that you're building your paper around, then you're not going to do well on this paper. So a thesis and a plan. What you're trying to prove, how you're trying to prove it. So then in your paper, you'll either want to, well, what you'll probably want to do is jump into the facts of the matter. So the facts about the emerging technology. Then you'll probably want to introduce some considerations for determining whether or not those features of the technology that you're talking about make it one that's good or bad, or one that we need to modify, or one that we need to flag some issues with as we move forward. So you'll probably want to introduce some moral theory like utilitarianism or deontology or both. You'll probably want to introduce something about social robots from the initial text we read, or something about the way we use a capitalist mode of production in this country, or if it's developed in another country, their mode of production in that country. These are things you will want to consider, but you want to lay it all out in the plan. I should know by the end of the first paragraph exactly what you're trying to prove, exactly how you're trying to prove it. No surprises after that. In this paper, you'll also need to deal with some objections. So you'll be taking a stance that's controversial in your paper. So you'll want to lay out your argument, then you'll want to consider objections to your argument. So let's go down to where the author of this paper considers objections. So everyone obviously does not agree with Singer's view. In this paper, you'll actually be producing either your own stance on the issue, or you'll be talking about a target argument, somebody else's argument, their stance on the technology, and evaluating their argument. In this paper, they're evaluating someone else's argument, but you could just as easily apply a paragraph like this to your own argument. Everyone obviously does not agree with Singer's view. Singer's opponents might object that we affluent people have a right to our property, and that donating to world hunger is a gift, not an obligation. Ayn Rand has said no man can have a right to impose an unchosen obligation or unrewarded duty on another. There can be no such thing as a right to enslave. This view is also echoed by Robert Nozick. So these poor nations would be in effect enslaving us to work for them and provide them with food. So note, even though the author is going to support Singer's argument, they're bringing up an objection and really letting that objection breathe in an entire paragraph. That's something you should do. Don't just bring up an objection in a sentence, dispense with it in a sentence or two. That's not sufficient for a paper like this. So then the author goes about attacking the objection. Singer could reply to this objection, however, by arguing that property rights are not more important or basic than the right to life. If you can save someone with $1 or 1 minute of your time, then you owe that money or time to that person. If you were starving and knew that someone made a decision not to help you after deciding instead to go to a movie that they really didn't want or need to see while you starved to death, how would that make you feel? So property rights, at least when compared to the right to life, should be overridden. Also, to respond to Ayn Rand, Singer might reply by arguing that a person with a right to life in fact imposes an unchosen obligation on others' behalf, whether or not they like it. If this is correct, then a person can have a right to impose an unrewarded duty upon another. So, they had a full paragraph of an objection, a full paragraph responding to that objection. You need at least that. You need at least to consider one objection to the argument that you will be supporting in your paper, and somehow dispense with that objection so that you can prove, to the extent you can, in 6 to 7 pages, your thesis. The author of this paper presents another objection, dispenses with another objection, and then they get to their conclusion. And I'm going to read the conclusion and talk about what the author does so you can take some tips from that. In conclusion, I've examined Singer's argument in favor of donating to world hunger and tried to show that he makes a good argument for his position. In order to do that, I considered 2 objections against his view, and arguably gave some plausible responses on his behalf. Though Singer's position demands a lot from affluent nations, we cannot deny our moral responsibility to help out people whose lives depend on receiving aid. World hunger is an important issue, and much more work is needed in order to discover what the best way of relieving it is. For example, I've not shown that Locke's view is definitely incorrect, though I have tried to answer an objection that he may have made. Whether or not Locke is correct is another issue for another day. So, what do you do in your conclusion? In your introduction, you stated what you will do. In the body of your paper, you do it. In the conclusion, you say what you have done. So, that's called a closed writing style, where you introduce all the features up top, you restate them in the end, and you do it all in the middle. That's the style of paper I'm having you write here. So do that. Say what you did. Then the last thing the author does here is pretty cool, and I suggest that you do it with your paper too. In these last couple sentences, the author points to what the next steps in this research project would be. So write your paper as if you're part of a community of scholars working on this issue, trying to solve it, right? You can't solve whatever issue you're trying to solve in 6 to 7 pages. Hopefully, it hits on bigger themes that people will need to spend more time working on. So if at the end of your paper you can show that you recognize that you're only taking out a piece, and show that you understand the larger issues of which your project is a piece, and point to the next step that researchers should take if they're interested in your project, oh man, that's so awesome. Now, what you shouldn't do is introduce an author who you haven't even discussed throughout the body of your paper in like the last 2 sentences. I wouldn't recommend that. But if you can show how your work fits into a bigger picture of research, a bigger research project that other people could take up, oh, that's awesome. I recommend you do it. So that's what I'm looking for in your paper. You'll need a strong introduction where you say, I am going to do this. If you don't use that word I'm going to be disappointed. You need to say what you're going to do in your paper, and then do it, and then say what you did in your paper. What you are planning to prove is your thesis. The way you're going to prove it is your plan. Then you do it in the body. Then you say you did it in the conclusion. And then you point to the next step in this bigger research project. And then you'll have a very good paper for this class. So good luck. If you have any questions about your topic, get them to me as early as possible so that we can get you on the right track as soon as possible, because you only have so much time to complete the project. So I hope you're all doing well. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Thanks so much. See you next time.